Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. And that mission has led me to create the Become a Better Investor community. In the community, you get access to our global asset allocation strategies and stock portfolios, our investment research, weekly live sessions, and risk reduction lessons I've learned from more than 500 guests. Go to myworstinvestmentever.com to claim your spot. Well, fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz from A Stotz Academy, and I'm here with featured guest Randall Crowder. Randall, are you ready to join the mission?
I think so. I'm excited. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I am excited to get you on, and already our talk before we turned on the recorder has got me thinking we're going to have some fun. Let me introduce you.
Absolutely.
Let me introduce you to the audience. Randall Crowder is an entrepreneur, angel investor, and venture capitalist who is currently the chief operating officer of Funware, which is a publicly traded technology company on the NASDAQ. Take a minute, Randall, and tell us a bit about the unique value that you bring to this wonderful world.
Oof, man, I tell you what, it's probably at this point, it's going to be experience. I used to have hair back in the day, believe it or not, and I think, I probably made more than one or two worst investments, both in terms of time, probably a little bit of faith along the way, and certainly we'll talk about, some actual company investments. But that experience builds scar tissue and muscle, right? And I think that's the value you begin to bring over time is the sum total of all your failures. And you really learn so much more from a failure than a success or bad leadership. And there's anecdotes galore, but they happen to be true. And I think for me, I've made a career collecting jobs I'm utterly not qualified for. But that doesn't mean that you can't excel. And so I always tell people, don't let a resume or a past failure or experience or even situations or even lack of resources define the job you want or the career you want to set out on. You can do pretty much anything in this world. And I'm sitting proof of somebody who kind of came from a weird background and was able to accomplish different things in different areas that, on paper probably would have made no sense. So I just keep leading with value and being humble and trying to help where I can. And I think that's all you can ask of people.
It made me think. We had a brief discussion before we turned on the recorder, and I was thinking about a book called Awareness, and it was written by, I believe, a Catholic priest. And that book was really interesting. It was recommended to me by a friend. And one of the lines he said in it is, he was trying to basically say, like, we're all human, we're all messed up. And he said, we should greet each other with, nice to meet you. I'm an ass, you're an ass. And I just felt like, this podcast, as I said, is about authenticity, where we talk about, the hard stuff and, what we learned from it and all that. But when you look at I guess the older that you get, the more you realize, like, everybody and everything is messed up in some way or another. And when you're young, you don't see it that way. You see the people above you, or you see the people in positions of power, and you think, wow, and they're wearing the fancy suit. Now you realize why they're wearing the fancy suit, right? To cover up all of the other things that are going on behind. But I'm just curious your thoughts about that, particularly for a young person that is looking at people and saying, I can't do it. Look at these guys. They're so amazing,
Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin. You have on the one side the older generation, and we talked about this before we started. This propensity to put on airs, and you don't want to. Maybe you don't want to think about all the failures. That's totally understandable. Some of them are scary, and some of them are painful. But more often than not, I think it's a function of ego. I think people, they want to feel bigger than they are. They want to kind of toot their own horn, and they don't want to focus on the failures because, hey, I don't fail. And I think, things like what you're doing and things like what I think real, leaders do is they show that vulnerable side. They help others learn from their mistakes or just help themselves learn from their mistakes. I mean, either way, it's kind of selfish. You're either trying to help others, which makes you feel great, or you're trying to help yourself, which hopefully, helps you do better. And then there's a younger generation who needs to understand, your heroes are all flawed. I mean, not to be morbid, but, you look at like, the suicide of Robin Williams. I mean, you think, God, here's this guy who brings so much joy to everyone's lives, and he's so funny and he's so charismatic. And, oh, wait, he's got mental health issues and he took his own life. Like, you're rich, you're successful. Like, what's the deal? And so, if that doesn't teach us that, there's more to the story, there always is. You can't hold these people up, as gods in your own life. We're all flawed and we're all asses at times, and maybe big asses at times. And so I think the younger generation really needs to see through the veil and appreciate that everyone's going through their own challenges. So to be kind and be, watchful of that, especially when people, maybe are almost looking for some help themselves. But then also the older generation, looking back and making sure they don't distance themselves from the next generation by being, not really that authentic.
Yeah, that's a great point about Robin Williams, and I often use that as an example to try to say, he had everything, and yet
Yeah.
something was wrong. And I guess one of the lessons that I take from that and what you've said is that now is the time to get your emotional house in order. It is not going to get
So true.
easier. It's not going to get better. Get it together now. And Randall, today's a special day. We're recording this for me on the 15th of September, and that's 2022. And it was 40 years ago today that I found myself on my knees in a bathroom in a hospital in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And it was that day that I surrendered and began a life of sobriety and a 12-step program.
Wow.
And so today I celebrate 40 years of sobriety, which is, so
Wow.
amazing. But
I mean,
when I,
congratulations.
yeah,
I mean, wow.
yeah,
That is, we were talking about worst investment, but talk about your best investment, the
mm,
investment in yourself and your future, and kind of just that ability to see that through and stick with it. I mean, wow. I couldn't be more happy to hear that, and
yeah,
congratulations.
thank you. And I think, the reason why I mention it is because being in I was in various rehabs and in 12-step program, and basically a lot of great people around me forced me to turn around and look at the
Uh,
monsters and said, you are going to go down if you do not start facing what you're running away from. And as a
uh,
result of that, it brought me a whole new level of awareness. And what I learned from that is that once you've dealt with all of the issues in your past,
mm,
and in that case, what people said to me is that if you don't address all of the issues from your past, you're going to end up right back where you are. And
yeah.
that was hard as hell. I mean, I was in 3 different treatment centers over about 9 months. But when I finished
Wow.
the final one, I was 17, just graduating from high school, and my life just has rocketed since. And so I just want to go back to what we originally started mentioning, is that we're all messed up, and the sooner that you become aware of that, in yourself and others, and the sooner that you deal with it, the better life that you're going to have. So that's just my little inspiration for the day.
I love it. I mean, and it's so powerful and it's so true. I mean, one, in terms of people, stepping into your life. I mean, I'm sure there was a times where you didn't want to hear it,
Yeah.
and I think people need to be cognizant of that in their own journeys. We're all trying to be type A, take over the world, type of people, and you got to stop along the way, and you'll find more. I find more joy, especially as I get older, in helping people. Like, I don't. I love getting people jobs. I don't really ask for jobs. Like,
Mm.
and I can help somebody make a connection or do something, it's so rewarding and so exciting. And so, I love that you had people in your life that, were willing to say, hey, I'm going to take time out of my journey to really help a friend or help someone I know. And that, at some point that resonated with you. And I think it's beautiful to hear.
Yeah, I, well, and the lesson is also, reach out and help. And I think part of what you're doing by getting on the show is just that. Before we get into the question, can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Funware, just so that we can understand that business and, what's the exciting stuff that you've got on your plate?
Yeah. So we went public back in 2018, but we've been around since 2009. So we basically got our start building large mobile applications. So we built the first NFL app, the first NASCAR app, all of Fox's mobile application. We did the presidential election in 2020. We did the Sochi Olympics. You name it, we've probably built large mobile ecosystems for pretty much any industry. And so it's all about like really turning your phone into a mobile concierge. So now, rather than just kind of like apps that are all about content consumption, it's all about engagement, which is why I love doing podcasts with really engaging stories, because that's what I think drives people. I think the old version of advertising was all about building awareness. I think that because we live in an on-demand economy with limited attention span, so awareness doesn't get it done anymore. It's all about contextual engagement. Like, how do I get your attention and influence you, and hopefully get you to listen to me when you're most likely willing to listen to me. So we build mobile ecosystems to do just that. So we just launched at Atlantis down in the Bahamas. We do smart workplaces. We do a lot of healthcare. So we tech enable the continuum of care. And so it's really exciting. It's kind of the frontier of where mobile's headed. We got our start before mobile was a thing. Now we're kind of transitioning into this new idea of digital transformation. And it's really cool to kind of be on the cutting edge of how do we like infuse technology into our real world experiences and kind of make some of that stuff you see in Hollywood a reality. So the Minority Reports and Back to the Futures of the world, where technology is seamlessly in the real world, we're trying to make that happen.
And for the investor that finds your stock in your company and decides, I like this story, they buy your stock, what is the story that you tell about what exposure for the future that an investor will get by buying your company?
Yeah, it's funny, that market, this, you've probably been tracking it. The market's had a pretty rough go of it this week. We were top gainer on NASDAQ yesterday and today. So we've been, a lot of people follow our stock, ticker symbol PHUN. I think we've gained, almost 50% in the last, 4 or 5 days. And I think, what I tell people is, one, we have great volume and liquidity in the stock, but more importantly, what we're doing is foundational. If you think about Amazon, we had 10 years to invest in Amazon below $100. So you had 10 years, and on 4 separate occasions, the stock cratered by like 60%. And on one occasion, it cratered by 90%, from 100 to like $6. And for 10 years, nobody paid attention. And it's like, none of us would be working today if we had just paid attention. And what Bezos knew was that there was going to be an on-demand economy, and he built the infrastructure to deliver it. And by the time people realized what he was doing, he built an unbeatable competitive advantage. And so we're doing the same thing with experiences. So we're kind of like AWS for engagement. So we're a cloud layer that will allow any brand, any company to have almost an interoperability layer. So we're not coming in saying we're one mobile application to replace them all. We're actually one mobile application to rule them all. So we play well with all other platforms. When we did that last workplace solution for a company called Norfolk Southern, one of the largest railway operators in the world, we've done 27 different integrations for them. And so that's 27 different companies, code bases, functions. It's all infused into our platform. And then to the customer, it's one seamless mobile application. So it feels like one product, but it's not. Just like AWS gives you that cloud infrastructure, that's what investors need to be paying attention to, these kind of foundational platform plays that really can help other businesses succeed better and get more utilization of the things they've already invested in. And that's what we're doing.
Great. And for the listeners out there, you can go to Funware, PHUNWARE.com to learn more and think about if that's a vision that you want to be invested in. It's exciting.
Absolutely.
Well,
it's exciting.
Now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstance leading up to it, then tell us your story.
So I've wrestled with this one a little bit because I've been investing for a long time, and I've got a lot of different companies, and I certainly don't want to make any of my my entrepreneurs who I've invested in feel bad. And so I thought I'd go a different direction because there's a lesson learned here. I actually helped start Funware back in 2009, but as an angel investor, helped organize in the first kind of $1.5 million seed round to get the company started. But then I did a career of angel investing and venture capital for about a decade before I circled back around to Funware, and I put about $3 million into the last private round before we went public. And it was in that investment that I decided to actually come on as COO, and I've been doing this for the last 5 years. But I knew it would take a special company for me to give up the VC hat. And this ended up being it, because I enjoyed being a VC, but it was also my worst investment. And I'll kind of explain what I mean by that. So out of angel investing, I ended up, doing some healthcare deals on kind of a club deal basis. And we thought, well, you know what? Let's start something. Let's start something to actually hang a shingle. It was called Texo Ventures, and the idea was, let's go out and invest in healthcare companies. And I'm not a doctor, so we were focused mostly on tech-enabled healthcare, health IT, things I could understand. How do you take technology and make inherently inefficient systems more efficient, right? So as I think back now, with the blessing of 12, 13, 14 years, I started thinking about, that was probably my worst investment, just starting that venture fund. And the reason being is I wasn't being true to myself. I got out of the Army, so I went to West Point for undergrad. 9/11 was my senior year, so I went straight, to war after graduating. Spent most of my career in the military, overseas. And when I got out, I felt like, okay, the Army will teach you one of two things. Either you love bureaucracy and left and right limits, and you love having a boss, or you absolutely hate it. I was the latter. And so I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I wanted to be my own boss. And that was something that was very important to me. And so as I was thinking about, this idea of like starting my own venture fund, it was really not being true to myself. And that's why I couch it as kind of my worst investment. And then, and this is important for especially the younger generation, but just about anybody. Inertia is a scary, scary thing. It's great when things are going, when you're on the right track. But if you're not on the right track, it can really take you very far off your chosen path. Ask a surfer, or, ask somebody who kind of, is trying to position themselves well in something, how quickly, the momentum can take you so far away from where you thought you would be. And then, fast forward a couple of years, you got 2.3 kids, you got a dog, you need health insurance, and, you can't go back and do it again and take those risks that you wanted to take, or do that job, or go to Europe and start your own, gelato shop. I don't know, whatever it is that sets your soul on fire. I remember thinking, like, I want to be an entrepreneur. And then I started justifying a lot of things to myself. I was like, well, I don't have an idea that I'm passionate about. And, maybe I'll learn the venture capital side of things to be a better entrepreneur. And, I started justifying why I was going away from where I wanted to be. And all of a sudden, got a little bit of success here and there. And, we're able to raise some money and raise more money and get more deals and do more things. And there were a couple problems with that. One, foundationally to me, it wasn't what I wanted to do. But I found myself doing it. And the fact that I was okay at it justified the continuing decision to keep doing it. Well, that's not what I wanted to do, though, and it's like that person who's stuck in a cubicle somewhere and all they really want to do is dance. It's like, go dance, man. If that's what's going to make you happy, go do it. And so, I start kind of, the success, builds upon itself, and I find myself doing things I didn't really enjoy. But then there's also something, and I've seen this with entrepreneurs a lot, understanding who you start stuff with. Most businesses, hell, probably most investments at this point, last longer than most marriages. And so you need to be very, kind of cognizant, especially for me, because I was investing seed early stage. That's why I say it lasts longer than most marriages. I wasn't investing in public equities. I was investing in, company creation. And Texo was a company we created. So not only was it my own company, it was my own investment in my own company. And then you start thinking about, okay, who are the people around the table? And I was young. I didn't know, and I kind of still felt like, oh, wow, I should be so appreciative of these opportunities. And, the people that I ended up starting it with, one was 20 years older than me, one was 30 years older than me. And we didn't do a great job of coming together and saying, who's going to do what? Who's going to add what value? How are we going to cut up the baby? What are we going to do? And that kind of ambiguity creates animosity a lot of times, where one person feels like they're doing more work, or one person feels like they're taking more risk, or one person feels like they're contributing more in one way. And it's the age old, who delivers more value to the family, mom or dad, or in this day and age it could be either. Somebody works, somebody stays at home and raises the kids. Who's adding more value? Well, it's a trick question. It can't be compared. They're both valuable. And so I found myself in that situation where we have an age gap, we have a capabilities gap. Some people are working more than others. Maybe some people have more capital to invest than others. And so there's this weird dynamic of who's providing more value. Well, it depends on what you think is most valuable. So not only am I doing a job that was never what I set out wanting to do, and I knew it, but I was also doing it with people who I probably didn't vet in the proper ways. Not that there's anything wrong with them, not that there's anything wrong with me, but when you come together, so I used to teach it. I taught for about a year at McCombs after I started basically a kind of an accelerator called Texas Venture Labs. And I remember I used to tell students, like, that idea of you just starting something with your two roommates and just cutting the company up a third, and you have three founders and there's no jobs or responsibilities clearly articulated, that is destined to be a lawsuit. Like, you need to define who's the CEO, who's the COO, who's investing what, who does what, and it doesn't have to be a third on the cap table. Maybe it shouldn't be, and you need to really have those hard conversations early on, and we didn't, and so it bred a lot of problems, and so that's why I kind of always go back to not being true to yourself and then not doing proper diligence. Those two things, man, they'll bite you every time.
So let's summarize for the listener the lessons that you learned.
So first and foremost, everyone loves, like, I love, podcasts. I love, I listen to motivational videos. I read books. I'm a student of the game. But the funny thing is, we human beings have this incredible internal compass, and it senses authenticity both in others and ourselves, like dogs smell fear. And when you go against it, you almost always regret it. And there's only two pains in this world, right? There's the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. And so having the discipline to really think about what it is you're most passionate about, and don't take the easy route, take the right route. And oftentimes the universe, God, whatever you want to believe in, it puts the best things in your life on the other side of sheer terror. And you have to do it in order to reach it. And so, sometimes the easy way is absolutely the wrong way. Don't just take what's right in front of you if you know it's not true to what you want to do. So it took me 10 years to come back to what I was always built to do: lead people, be in a company, one team, one fight, carry a flag, follow me, lead by example. I mean, I did it in the military. No. I always knew I wanted to do it in the business sector. And it took me 10 years to find my way back to what was my authentic self. So, wow. I think that's going to be the biggest thing for me, is just know who you are and what you want to do, and don't settle for the easy way when you know what the right way is.
Fantastic. Well, maybe I'll share a few things that I took away. I wrote down a bunch of stuff as you were talking. First thing I wrote down is VC angel investing is really sexy. And you can get...
There was an allure.
There's definitely an allure. You can get caught up in it. And that brings me to the next thing, which is starting a business, starting any business, is a trap, ladies and gentlemen. You are going to be trapped with those people. Your money's going to be trapped. Your time's going to be trapped. And the question is, if you're going to be trapped in a situation for 5 years or whatever it takes, or 10 years, is that the person you want to be trapped in a little cell with, trying to figure out how the hell we solve this? And I think that goes back to picking your partners is what you're talking about. And I think for the listeners out there, the big message is that don't just jump into something, and try to find the right people to do things with. And I wrote down a word. There's Michael Porter talks about in his books on competitive strategy, something called fit. And what you realize is that as a financial analyst, I analyze thousands of companies over my life. But what I realize is that there's three things I believe makes one company successful over another. Number one, the right leader. And number two, the right leader chooses the right direction. You can have the right leader, but if they choose the wrong direction, you're dead. You went over the wrong hill.
Yeah.
And
the wrong leader will be humble enough to pivot if they need to. And I think the right leader will pivot when they need to. The wrong leader will die on that hill. They will be like, well, I'm too embarrassed to change direction because this is the path I committed to. And I told everybody this was the right way and I can't be wrong. So I'll just send everybody to their death.
Yep. And then the third thing I would say, which is the true secret sauce of competitive advantage, is coordination of the efforts of the management team. If the CEO has the right CEO, right direction, but they can't coordinate. I used to think it was about getting the right people on that team, but I realized there's a lot of good people. And average people can actually do amazing things if they are coordinating. Concentration of fire, concentration of, and so it's the right leader, the right direction, and the coordination of effort. And that's the word that I wrote down, fit, that I was thinking about when you were talking about that. And the last thing I was thinking about was, those things that our parents used to say. I don't know if parents still say it, but that my mom used to say, nothing ever comes easy. And I wrote that down because you were saying easy versus right. And, I would just say, nothing good comes easy. If it did, we'd all have all of this great stuff. But the reality is that good things in our life we have to fight for, we have to work for. And so, what did you say? There's either the discipline,
the pain of regret, or the pain of discipline.
Regret and discipline. Yeah. So those are the things I took away. Is there anything you would add to that?
The only thing it would be a small footnote on coordination, because I think you're so spot on. And an element of coordination that took me a very long time to learn. And between us girls, I'm still trying to figure it out. So if anybody's listening and figures this out, please contact me and tell me how you did it. Early mentors in my life have told me something that's always stuck with me, and I've been wrestling with it. It's not just coordination, but it's delegation. And what I mean by that is figuring out how to be comfortable in a situation where you could get an A at a task, and allowing somebody else to get a B so that it frees you up to go do something else where you might be able to get an A+, but that's exponentially more valuable to the whole. But knowing full well you could have done that other job better than the person you delegated it to, or maybe just different, and being okay with that. That is so hard for leaders to wrap their brain around, to understand. You got to let people do what they do. You need to resource them. You need to support them. And you can't always come down on them if they do it differently, or even if they don't do it as good as you. And understanding how to be okay with that is one of the great challenges I think leaders will always face.
Yeah, it's a great lesson about delegation. I remember I became an analyst when I was 28 years old, and then I built a career as an analyst, and then I became a head of research, and then I hired the best analysts I could find in the world. I had a team of 5 amazing analysts that came up with great research ideas, and we worked together really well. We had a lot of fun, but I would often ask myself, I'm a graduate of Long Beach State, nothing special. I studied finance, I'm reasonably bright, but this guy graduated from Columbia. This guy graduated from Cornell. This guy was a Peace Corps volunteer, was in Africa, speaks French, speaks this, that. And all of these guys are and I was always wondering what made me the leader of that team. And my conclusion was delegation, that they just weren't that comfortable to delegate. And I was looking at how can I delegate everything? And it's not just the things that, delegating the things that you're not good at is, important. But I delegated in 2000, I delegated the thing that was my number one skill, which was Excel at the time.
Oh, wow.
And I decided I'm going to give it to this guy, this Thai guy. And more than 20 years ago, we've been working together now for almost 22 years, that guy and myself. And he's, I would say top 1 to 5% in the world in Excel. And he can solve any problem that I have. And I kind of gave up on that, what was my core strength. And that forced me to find another core strength, which was communicating and all of that. So a lot to take away.
That's such a great story. That's such a great story.
based on what you've learned from this story and what you continue to learn in your life, what one action would you recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate when they see this situation?
I'm going to steal from what you said about Long Beach, because I had the same thing. I went to West Point. I deployed for about 6 years, and I kept thinking, like, how am I going to compete with these folks that are graduating from Columbia, doing billion-dollar deals on Wall Street? And for anybody, especially the younger group, but even older folks who are thinking about their own position or maybe even transitioning careers later on in life, it's all smoke and mirrors. The thing that you can do to level the playing field is network and relationships. I think the real value of your school is really the relationships you build. And you can send somebody to Columbia who will bury themselves in curriculum and never kind of learn how to capture being social as a competitive advantage for their own brand. And you can send somebody to community college who just is that that magnet, that personality. And I'll take that person with maybe not the Ivy League degree, but who has just immense, social skills and high EQ and authenticity and work ethic. I'll take that 10 times out of 10. You're not going to impress me with numbers. You're not going to impress me with your resume. Because, and going back to angel and VC investing, we want you to have a business plan. We want you to have a pitch deck. We're not going to look at any of it. We're not going to really base our decision on much of it. And so, it's the same thing with a resume. I want you to have gone to school. I want you to have committed to the process of going through it. You're not going to win me over by going to Harvard. And quite frankly, if you lead with that, the conversation is probably over for me. And so there is a humility to real, true leadership, but there's also, this great leveling effect where you think about, your school is not your resource. Your resourcefulness is your resource. And you can be resourceful anywhere you are, from any station in life. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have status. You don't have to have, connected parents. You just have to have the willingness to put yourself out there and try to create fire. And so I think, that to me is something that I could always have done better. I wish I would have done even better, because the more optionality you have, the more exposure you have, the more experience you have, the better decision you're going to make. And so it's like, we learn this as children and parents of children. You don't like say, hey, you will only do this. I mean, some parents do, but we won't go there. I want my kid to experience everything, dance, draw, sing, do this, do that. And I want to expose them to as much as possible so they find their own path. And we forget that as we become adults. And I think, the more you can network, the more experiences you have, the more stories you can listen to, the more points of contact you have in whatever career you may be interested in, but maybe haven't decided on, the better decision making you'll have in the long run.
There's one four-letter word that you just used that I want to just continue on with, and that is fire. And I always use the example when I teach students and young people. I tell about how I went to university and I was kind of lost and I wasn't sure what I was doing, and there was a professor who taught economics 101, and it was a pretty scary course for all of us. There was 200 people in the room.
Still scares me.
Yeah, it was at Kent State, where I started my education, and I went into the room, and it was intimidating because there was 200 people in the room, and we were all sitting there chatting and whatever, and lots of noise, and then the professor walks in. And he says, good morning, everyone. There's 200 people in this room. By the end of this class, there'll be only 100. 200 of you will be gone. And out of the 100 that remain, I will give 10 A's. Let's get started. And I just thought to myself, I am going to be in the remaining 100, and I am going to be one of the 10 that gets an A. And it forced me to rethink the whole way that I took notes, the way I studied, the way I prepared. And I threw myself into that class, and I got an A. And I basically attribute to that man, who I can't even remember his name, I attribute that he lit a fire. And so you used the word fire. I've read more than, I'd say my estimate is 3,000 to 5,000 books in my life. And these books just are part of that fire that just continues on. So find your fire. That may come at a great university. It may come at a community college. It may come at an online, whatever. but find your fire and pursue it. Now, let me ask you, what is a resource that you'd recommend for our listener?
That's a great question. You know, for me, you said it. You said it one. I mean, obviously, reading is so important, and not just reading, for the sake of reading, but like, really just for context. Hearing people's stories. I love that. I love what you're doing. Those kind of authentic things. Because some books get, a little bit, kind of macro, and it's, I don't think there's as much to learn there as the real kind of in the weeds books. And I'm sure you've probably recommended some throughout the time frame of this podcast. But I think I did this when I got out of the Army. I made a list of 100 people in town that I wanted to meet and why I wanted to meet them. What stories I wanted to hear, what questions I wanted to ask. And you always hear that anecdote, if you could have dinner with 3 people historically, that have died, who would it be? Oh, I'd love to have dinner with Jesus. And it's like, well, that's anecdotal, and, you're never going to be able to do that. You can do it with other people, just in your city. You don't have to fly anywhere. You don't have to go anywhere. But I set out to try to reach 100 people. And sometimes it would be, 3 degrees of separation. Sometimes it would be 1. Sometimes I would have no connection to them whatsoever. And maybe I'm going to go stand in a lobby and wait for them to, kind of walk by and try to just, stalk them a little bit. But, hint, hint, people actually kind of appreciate that. They appreciate the hustle. Now, I understood out of that 100, and this is actually what happened, 50 never returned, my email, never returned my calls. I couldn't find them, and they just kind of fell by the wayside. 20 kicked the can down the curb, and, maybe half of those I ended up finally reaching at some point. But a good 30 were transformational, and they remain resources today. And I think, a lot of things we have in this world are commoditized. There's a lot of skill sets that you can now delegate. Human interaction and your ability to sell yourself is one of the last great competitive advantages. And I think, and it kind of takes a little bit of practice, because it's real uncomfortable. Cold calling somebody, trying to sell them something is hard. Trying to sell them yourself is just, probably the hardest thing on the planet. Like, who is this again? Like, why would I meet with you? And really kind of, figuring out that human dynamic is something that I'm so thankful I did, because it was not something that was, natural to me. It was really scary. But I did it. And for every time I did that in my career, it's led to something that has been transformational in my journey. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Sometimes I've learned something, sometimes not. But, I would just, putting yourself out there is so important. And self-selecting out because you don't think you can succeed is an epidemic, and at least in this country. But I would assume it's probably more of a human condition than anything. And I think so many people, they don't make that call, they don't make that email, they don't reach out, they don't set that meeting, and they just think, well, why would this person ever want to meet with me? You don't know until you try.
So, ladies and gentlemen, make that list. And you don't have to even make 100. Just make 5 right now and get started, and set the goal and the intention. Setting goals. Last night I was at an event for chartered financial analysts in Thailand, where I used to be president. And I was with the past presidents, and we were talking. But a young man came up to talk to me afterwards, and he said, "You remember I studied with you at university in 2008? And I said, "Oh, yeah." His nickname is Jot, J-O-T. And I said, he said, "You remember you asked us to write down our top 3 goals when we were in our final year at university?" I said, "Yeah, definitely. I have them all right here in my library where I keep all of them." And he said, "One of my goals was to get my CFA by the time I was 30. And here I am with you, having gotten my CFA charter and passed it." And I was like, yeah, that's just, so set your intention, set your goal. I think the inspiration that you provide to us, all of us, is to, what is the 100 people outreach that you want to do in your life, ladies and gentlemen? Now is the time to write it down and set it as your intention and follow it, whatever that thing is. It could be 100 days of exercise at the park. Reach out to 100 people, whatever that thing is. Find it, write it down, and set the intention. Last question. What is your number 1 goal for the next 12 months?
For me, it's changed because, and this is probably, maybe speaking to perspective. So I got married in July. We found out a week before, we were to, go through the wedding that, she was expecting. And so I have, a baby girl on the way here in March. If you asked me 2 months ago, it would have been, I want to have Funware at a $500 million market cap, or, I want to get to a $50 million ARR by the end of 2023. And it would have been very cold, very, KPI driven business, goals, because that's my mindset. That's how I've always been. And now all I can think about is, how do I be the best father and husband I can be? And, I think it's important for people to understand your goals. They need to be we talk about awareness in the beginning of this. Money, I love, so I'm going to steal it. I love the, hey, I'm an ass, you're an ass. Now can we just talk and be authentic? If you are an ass and you make money, you'll be a rich ass. And, money isn't going to fix your personality problems. It's not going to fix your happiness, as we already saw with Robin Williams in our conversation around that. I think goals are a scary thing, and people need to be very aware of them. I'm older than, I care to admit, and, I'm a little bit late to the whole adulting game. I was all about work, and I was like, I'll have kids, at some point. And I probably would have been 80 and turned around with no kids going, what the hell happened? Because I was just chasing work. And it was just, I making time for your relationships, making time for your kids, making time for your significant other, those should be your goals. And I guarantee you, if you do that well, you'll be better at business. And I always say this to people, and I said this to my soldiers in the military, I said, just because you're busy doesn't mean you're productive. And just because you're productive doesn't mean you're effective. A lot of people confuse action with results. And, you can spend, 2 hours, some people, their 2 hours is worth more than 10 from somebody else. And so you have time for working out, you have time for running, you have time for your family, you have time for your kids, and business is going to be there. It's not going anywhere. Now, sometimes you're going to pull all-nighters, and sometimes it's going to be hard, and you still got to have, good goals for your career. But as I get older, I've realized that, my goals are changing to be a really good person, to be present, to make it home in time, to have dinner with my wife. I want to be able to, help my kids learn about all these really cool activities that are going to define, their growth. And I don't need to be on the cover of Forbes to do that.
Great. Well, I love what you say. Activity, productivity, and effectiveness. Let's figure out how we become more effective. All right, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. If you haven't yet joined the Become a Better Investor community, just go to myworstinvestmentever.com right now. As we conclude, Randall, I want to thank you again for joining our mission. And on behalf of A Stotz Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
No, thank you. Be kind to each other, be present. Always remember that everybody's got their own journey. And sometimes, it might rub you the wrong way, but you can always be kind and be present and look for ways to help other people. I guarantee you it'll be more rewarding and it'll be your best investment. And so keep an eye out for those in need and ways in which you can add value.
Beautiful. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, let's celebrate that today we added one more person, Randall, to our mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. This is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz, saying, I'll see you on the upside.